Imagine running a little over $1 billion per year business for which you are informed of your operating budget, not on an annual basis, but every couple of months. You keep getting orders from above to do more, even though the threat of a budget reduction is ever constant. Now imagine that your business was guaranteeing the safety of roughly 80% of the food consumed in the United States. Management of the FDA's food safety operations. It's got to be fun. Of course, FDA isn't the only federal agency that has confronted budget uncertainty in recent times due to partisan bickering in Washington, D.C. Every federal agency lives in uncertainty, frequently surviving on brief continuing resolutions that buy just a few more months at a time on the previous budget rate, or even slightly less, along with the threat of greater future cuts. But it's one of the agencies where the consequences of not being able to plan for sufficient resources a year in advance could lead to serious problems with the public's health. March 2013 is when we are filming this, and we are in another budget showdown. Now, there might be a more permanent resolution of the latest budgetary standoff by the time this show airs, but you can't blame anyone for being skeptical given what has transpired in recent times. To talk about the dangers of not funding FDA's food safety centers, or at least not giving these centers any kind of a solid year-long commitment to a budget, is Steven Grossman, Deputy Executive Director of the Alliance for a Stronger FDA. Steven,
yes.
Let's talk about the Alliance for a Stronger FDA first. Let's introduce them. What do you guys do?
We are a coalition of about 200 organizations. We represent consumer groups, patient groups, health professionals, industry, trade associations. And what we all have in common is that we support more resources to make sure that FDA can do its job, has the resources it needs, can hire the people that it needs to do the job. One of the things that makes us very different is regulatory agencies are sort of in a bad place in Washington in general in terms of bad publicity and people thinking that regulation is bad. FDA is unique in that both consumers and industry want to see it well funded.
Yeah. What's great about you guys, and we call you all the time when there's this budgetary showdown,
yes, you do.
is that we know you'll have the numbers and we know you'll have a viewpoint on what's happening. So for our audience who's not intimately familiar with how food safety is handled at the FDA, talk a little bit about the two centers there that deal with food safety.
Okay, there are, as you say, there are two centers at FDA that deal with food. One is the Center for Food Safety and Applied Nutrition, which has food, cosmetics, dietary supplements, applied nutrition, but most of the money goes to food and also particularly to inspections and regulatory guidance being provided to producers of foods. And then the Center for Veterinary Medicine, which covers drugs as well as foods for animals. That's both companion and food-producing animals, although the bulk of the work is applicable to food-producing animals. Altogether, as you said, it's a little over $1 billion. It's a major management problem to get the money in the right place, to have inspections held at the right time, which means a bit of a surprise, and to have regulations ready so that people know what's expected of them.
Let's talk a little bit about what's happening. Like I said in the opening, it's a good chance that by the time this airs, this problem may be resolved, or we may have another continuing resolution, who knows. But right now, we're in another showdown. Sequestration has happened. We're just counting the days before we get to realize the full impact of sequestration. There's some things that we're worried about. They're trying to get to the March 27th date with some kind of a plan for the rest of the year. And already you're starting talking about 2014, the fiscal year that's next, and what should the FDA food safety operation get in 2014. So right now, if sequestration continues on as it's projected to, what is likely to happen to food safety at the FDA? What are we looking at?
Well, I think the best way to look at it is step back and say these battles seem to be weekly, just as you've said, and the idea of uncertainty is a part of, unfortunately, an increasing part of the agency culture in regulating food. I think the place, though, is to step back and say, how much are they getting? How much are they likely to get in the near term? And is it enough? The reality is the budget for the two centers is a little over $1 billion. If sequestration goes into effect, they'll lose about 5% of that. Based on things that are happening this week, we hopefully will know within a week how much money they have for FY13, fiscal year 13. And you'll notice that true to what you just said, we're already halfway through fiscal year 13, and they're still discussing the budget. As we look to FY14, to the one coming up starting in October, the baseline is probably likely to be very close to the same, about $1 billion. And one could say, okay, is that enough? Because that's how much you survived with in this past year. And there are two primary reasons why it isn't. One is Congress passed the Food Safety Modernization Act 2 years ago, and that calls for a fairly complete overhaul of the way the agency and the food industry approach food safety for the American people.
Right.
Most notably, it involves going from a prevention model, going from a reactive model, where are the problems, to a prevention model. Let's get everybody on the same page as what you need to do to prevent food safety problems. It also changes the import process to do much more in the way of overseas intervention, and also to focus more of the inspections on where they're most likely to be the problems.
Yeah. One of the first measures in the law is just to simply step up the number of inspections.
That's correct.
Which requires staff.
And that requires staff. So part of it is that the budget for next year, unless we're successful in getting the agency more, and we're hopeful, is that the same amount of money doesn't buy the same level of inspections. You have a new law that requires not only more inspections, but more guidances from the agency, more oversight, all of which is needed to make the American food supply much safer. The second thing that's changing, and why this year's budget can't be next year's budget, why we need more, is that globalization is intensifying. Globalization is a good thing. Clearly, American consumers want it. There's still a favorable balance of trade in the food area. It's not a matter that we've become dependent on others so much as overseas markets supply things that either we don't anymore, or that where our situation has changed. I like, for instance, to point out that when I was growing up, if you wanted fruit in winter, you opened a can of syrupy peaches from Dole or Del Monte. Now, practically anywhere in America in January, you can get fresh fruit.
Right.
But that's part and parcel of globalization. And that's a process that, if anything's accelerated, it provides Americans with a more varied and more healthful diet, but it provides verification problems, inspection problems that are new and accelerating.
So Congress rolls out FSMA, and it's going to improve food safety, and then it doesn't give FDA really any more resources to do that with. They've written some of the regulations already. They've got some more regulations to put out. Is it likely that FSMA is not going to be fully implemented the way that the agency is being budgeted?
FSMA will be implemented over time. What will be different, depending on the budget, is how long that takes. And there's sort of two parts to that, one of which is the sooner you maintain a higher level of inspections, the sooner you have things like foreign supplier verification, the better the system becomes. It's not even just a matter of the total number of inspections, it's are you doing enough inspections so that even the people who didn't get inspected this year keep standards high because they are worried that they're going to be inspected tomorrow or 6 months from now. And so there's a sentinel effect that is involved. And so when you slow it down, you do a couple of things. One, you lose some of the warning to everybody, you lose some of the conversion. What could happen easily is that it takes 7 years, and I'm just making that number up, 7 years to implement a program that really should have been implemented in 4.
Yeah.
I don't think it's a matter that it won't happen, because the law, almost unique among laws that were considered in 2010 and 2011 in Congress, was passed on a bipartisan basis. So it really does have support. in terms of, is this the right way to go? It's what FDA wants, it's what Congress wants, it's what makes sense. The problem is, how quickly can we get there? It could be done in 4 years. It doesn't look like, on the basis of the budget, that it will be, and that's a shame.
Yeah. Okay, so is there any hope at all that we're ever going to get off this budgetary roller coaster and get to a more normal process?
We're hopeful that we can. One of the things that has been a strong part of the budget and appropriations process, in which we've, at the Alliance, have been opposed to and tried our best, but it's a very large battle, is to go from the system we're in now, where the appropriations committees don't have the power they once did. It used to be that the appropriations committees had a finite amount of money, and they had to decide what the national priorities were. And during the last 6 years when the Alliance has been active, we've been able to get FDA a disproportionately large increase compared to other agencies. What's happened the last year or so is that we've been in a system where everything was done across the board. Savings were needed, cuts were needed to be made, and instead of going program by program, Congress just cut across the board. This hurt FDA. What we're hopeful is we have new appropriations chairmen over the last couple of years, and they are determined to wrest back this process, and they're hopeful that in FY14 it will be done agency by agency. And the mantra that the Alliance goes by is that we want a system where there's winners and losers, because we believe that FDA has the best case, and that if there's a process in which the staff, the Congress, can look at it, that they'll agree.
Well, let's hope for the sake of the FDA, the consumers, that we reach some kind of stability here at some point or another.
I think that would be very important for FDA. It is, as you pointed out, a management problem not to know how many people you have. And then you also have the issue that you have to hire people. It takes time to train them. When you don't know what your budget is, that compounds that problem.
Well, thanks to Steven Grossman for joining us in the studio. Come back next time to see another food regulatory personality in the spotlight.